Hello and welcome to the Drunken Balrog podcast. This is the first in the NPC series, a Dungeons and Dragons themed podcast, and today we are joined by Matt and Keljorn. According to the 1D&D FAQ, 1D&D is the code name for the next generation of Dungeons and Dragons, bringing together three initiatives that will shape the future of the game. They are broken down into D&D rules, which is currently the 5th edition that we all know and love. D&D Beyond, that we all loathe and use, and D&D digital play experience, which sounds like it's going to be a Foundry kind of thing that they're working on. I know originally it was thought of the 1D&D would be a new set of rules, completely separate from version 5. So it would be like a version 6, but it has now become more of a 5.1. What was your thought? What did you lot think when they first announced new rules being written and make it sound like it was a brand new version?
Suspicious, because they're trying to hide things. They said it was backwards compatible, but like any new product is released, they want to try and phase out the old thing. And I only just started learning comfortably the old thing, and I've got so many PDFs that are on the old system. I mean, old in that sense. So I'm very not keen to play. I mean, I've got enough content for 5e to keep me going for a good 10 years probably, with enough excitement and variation. And there's various different other systems I play as well I'd like to explore. I mean, people are still playing 3.5, still playing old school Renaissance is the first edition. So I don't think 5e is going anywhere for at least the next, for the core fans, for the people who really like it. I think it's here to stay, and I think people will try it, but because of the OGL debacle that we'll maybe discuss later, I think all they've really done is fracture the community into lots of different people playing lots of different games that are very similar, like the new MCDM and Project Black Flag and things like that.
I've been reading up on it. It does seem to be just an improvement, like a patch on 5e, which we'll be covering shortly with some of the stuff that I was looking at. What about you, Matt? What your thoughts?
Yeah, I think my my initial reaction was I never thought they'd do a huge amount to the game. I would like them to. You know, I would like it to be the kind of standard game that people play is maybe a bit more interesting. But 5e is just so accessible in terms of how it's designed that I think it becomes really hard with how popular it's become in the last sort of since the release of 5. It becomes really hard to completely change the system up. You know, people don't have stuff tying them to a game as much, so it's not like Warhammer where to play the game, you're kind of probably still playing those rules. So I never thought they'd change it too much. Once they said it was backwards compatible, I figured we weren't going to get very much at all. Having seen the Unearthed Arcanas and all the sort of playtest packets and stuff, I mean, they seem to constantly be going back on the rules and changing very, very little, albeit there are some things they're improving, but I think how they've constructed the surveys in particular, there's one particular thing of the surveys that I think they've fundamentally misunderstood, and I think that's created a lot of problems.
What was that?
For how they're taking feedback. So they ask a question about overall class satisfaction, and then they ask about satisfaction of individual features. So they say, okay, how do you feel about action surge for the fighter? How do you feel about second wind? How do you feel about the new version? And people go, oh, well, yeah, I really, all the new versions are good. Do you like multi-attack? Well, of course I like multi-attack, it's what makes the fighter a fighter. Then they ask about overall satisfaction. They say, well, everyone was 80% satisfied with all the fighter abilities, but 60% satisfied with the fighter overall. And they said, well, that's probably they ask the overall question first and people don't realize how much they like it. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding. I'm a social researcher by background, right? You've got to really deconstruct the question. The reason people aren't giving that answer isn't because they haven't thought about it. I don't think there's a lot of very little players who think about it a lot. What they haven't thought about is the fact that people are giving that answer because the fight is missing something overall. It's not the existing features not good, for instance. It's that there's some fundamental things that the fight is missing that aren't captured in those features, and that's where people are dissatisfied. They also just have no idea how to write a monk, but that's complete dumpster fire. So that's probably the time when we had 6 hours to chat rather than 30 minutes.
We'll save that for a later date then. Fighters was actually one of the classes I was looking at the what they're changing as. I think Keljorn, you said that you liked the fighters, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do like a fighter because it's nice and simple. I mean, 90% of my time is running games, not playing them. So for me, it's like I get decision anxiety. If you give me 200 spells, that's too many spells for me. You tell me I can do these 5 spells. Great, okay. What's one of the 5 options I have in this situation that are best for me? Not here is like an Argos catalog of options that just confuse me. It's just decision anxiety. To be honest, a lot of what I do is emotional rather than, like you said about how satisfied you are with the fighter is this, or how satisfied. To me, it's like, are we playing? Yes. Is it completely broken? No, then let's go. I don't get down to the nitty gritty. I'm just, Wizards of the Coast have soured me on their behavior. I can't trust them. I know that there are some people at a company that didn't decide to do the OGL that genuinely said this would be a really bad idea for the community. However, I can't trust a business to act. I've got a Sly Flourish or Mike Shea, who runs a podcast, said, you've got to keep looking at these candles. D&D Beyond is one candle, is where you can make a digital character. Another candle is the books being available online. Another PDF, like having all the stuff, past stuff, PDFs. Why can't we buy 5e PDFs and then we can own them forever? We don't need to worry about Wizards of the Coast. So I'm very much like trying to keep my eye on what I can make sure that I've got for the next 5 to 10 years, and stepping away from my dependence on Wizards of the Coast.
They're doing bundles that will cover both digital and physical sets of the books and everything else. So you'll be able to. I'm going to assume there's a code that you use, and it'll register with D&D Beyond. So you have the PDF version, but you also have a physical book you can actually.
But D&D Beyond is not a PDF; it's rental. It's like iTunes. So, and don't get me wrong, I like my films on iTunes, but I think someone said if I put it on a USB stick and put it in a basically deposit box, I can go back in 10 years and maybe it will still be there. Nobody can steal it. Whereas D&D Beyond is like, it's rental. And yes, it is highly unlikely that they're going to turn around and go, oh, that stuff you bought, we're going to take it away.
Yeah.
But it's just...
You still have the physical copy. So, I know you said quite before, you have the physical copy, you don't want to pay again for a digital copy. So this will hopefully make that a bit less of a problem. Hopefully.
I certainly hope so.
We'll see how it pans out. But I was looking at the changes to the fighters, and they do seem to be more about getting in there and doing damage than they seem to when I was last looking at what.
So I'm fighters. In theory, one of my favorite classes. So I like not because it's simple necessarily, but I just like the idea of being this person in this crazy magical world who's just said, oh yeah, I'm fighting, this lich who's, changing reality. And I've gone, okay, I'm going to hit it with it. Everyone else is doing these crazy things. I'm the bloke who's just like, oh, I've picked up a spear and I'm going, all right, got to deal with this. And I've always just quite liked that. Like, it's felt like I quite like playing like Imperial Guard and Warhammer and stuff like that. Like, I quite like being in a position where I'm like, I can really place myself in that that reality of that character. And the new fighter is really good. It can do a lot of damage. So new champion, even if you play new champion fighter, which still isn't a particularly good subclass, it is so easy to get advantage now that you would expect to have advantage almost all the time. You would be doing insane levels of damage. but it's still ultimately some of the issues with the fighter. The fighter was never a bad fighter, and some of the stuff they've done is essentially rebalance the fighter to remove the power attack mechanic of sharpshooter and great weapon master, and move some of that power elsewhere into things which are more interesting. That's fine. But I don't actually think the fighting generally was a massive problem with the fighter. They could make it a bit more interesting, but they did a lot of that with Tasha's. The issue with the fighter is the moment you get out of a fight, most fighters can do very little. There's no skills, particularly a strength-based fighter. There's one skill attached to it. There's no skills attached to con. So suddenly, you're really struggling to find that area where it's like you can really contribute a lot in role playing, you can contribute in role playing, but in terms of skills and like other things you can do. The reality is, most of the time, almost all the time, someone can do it better than you because you just don't have those innate built skills, and that's the problem with the fighter. They've improved on it, but I don't think they've really necessarily hit on the issue.
I mean, the fighters do look like they're more like Dresk from Guardians of the Galaxy, where, you know, dumb but powerful seem to be their character style, and now they just seem to be more powerful, which, you know, a good fighter needs the power, and the bonus attacks and all the advantage that they are getting I think will make being a fighter a much more valuable asset in a battle. But as you said, they're limited to just basically DPS with not much more outside of that.
Yes. Yeah, so they've kind of addressed the problem, but it gets back to that issue of the question, right? Like, everyone's like, oh yeah, I really like these features because they have made the fighter better. Weapon mastery is more interesting. Particularly once you get to those levels where it's like every hit you can swap them up. So it's like, okay, do I want to push this guy, or do I want to try and knock them down, for instance?
Yes.
That suddenly starts getting interesting. Or if you want to do insane stuff, and start like juggling weapons with Nick, you can do like a gazillion attacks. It's a bit gamey, but you can do it. But so that's
it's a bit gamey in the game that we're playing.
No, but a bit gamey in the sense that if you attack with your not light weapon in your right hand, you then drop it, you then left hand attack with your Nick, offhand attack with your Nick weapon, you can then take another attack with your, you then swap that weapon to your right hand attack, and then you can make a fourth attack. Like, there's loads of ways of like exploiting how the interactions work and dropping weapons to add like extra attacks. That's just,
which for some people is like, yes please, that is my jam. Whereas for me it's like, no, can I just hit it please and pretend I'm Zoro? That'd be great.
Yeah, but like, so there's lots of things you can do, and there's lots of options, and that's great. But it's that misunderstanding the question where it's like, well, yeah, but most people didn't really have a problem with saying, oh, if I want to be a fighter, I'm going to take Great Weapon Master, Polearm Master, and Sentinel, and I'm just going to destroy people. Like, that still wasn't necessarily the problem. It was that, okay, that can get a bit boring, but, you know, you play Battle Master or something, you can make it interesting. Bring in a couple new interesting subclasses, you can fix that. But the issue is still roleplay. The default fighter doesn't really bring added things to roleplay other than the roleplay you bring. Which, as a fighter, you're probably in that niche, a strength-based fighter in particular, you're kind of in that niche where you're just like, oh, no, I can't really do much. So you just stand back until they need a heavy rock move.
Basically, Hulk.
That's the sort of thing that you would establish up front, because you'd be like, we all know going into this campaign what sort of campaign we want to play, and so whatever the the features of the fighter are, you're the one who's going to really bring that roleplay element. You're right, it is cool to do cool things, but I mean, I played one fighter that was basically a diplomat with a rapier. He was basically D'Artagnan. I was like, yes, technically, this is maybe not the best class to go with this particular type of character, but I was like, whatever, I'm just going to play him as a fighter. I don't even think that was 5e, I think that's something else, but...
Yeah, but it depends on the system you're playing in, right? Like, Pathfinder, the fighter is so strong that you can kind of get away with just... If you did some throwaway stuff on top of just your normal stuff, you'd probably be okay, but the fighter really needs you to actually build it pretty well. Yeah, it's not complicated. You throw one of the power attack things on, one of the things that gives you a bonus action attack. In combat, you're going to be effective, but that's your first 2 feats used. You're probably going to want a third feat, and then you have to ASI bump up whatever your core skills are. It's really hard to find space in a character if you want to build a character that's strong. So this is coming from the perspective of someone who likes optimization, right? I enjoy making characters that are strong. I like going to roleplay and do some other stuff. But you actively have to compromise yourself to actually have these skills. If I play a bard, I can optimize a bard, and you've got expertise, you've got spells, you've got, you potentially have loads of different AoE stuff, and you can just change the game. Plus, depending on how you build it, you can be a respectable fighter.
But the strength stat is limited. I can't think of how often we've ever used strength stats in anything other than a fight.
Yeah. Or maybe like a wrestle. Like you can occasionally maybe be creative and be like, okay, we're going to do a drinking contest, and you can use your con. So you can use use the variant rule where you apply a different skill to a different ability to a skill. So you say, you can use a con intimidation check to try and just down this pint and out drink this person, right? Yeah. There are things you can do with that, but that requires a lot of sort of DM creativity.
Yeah.
A lot of players aren't just playing with a lot of players aren't used to even just being like, oh Christ, what's my perception? What do I add to that? Like, I've played with lots of people, and then you suddenly go, okay, I want you try and explain, like, okay, you've got your proficiency, and then you're adding your proficient in that, and then you're adding your con or whatever. It doesn't, for me, that's one of the, it's really tricky, and that lack of diversity of things you can do does just, particularly for fighter, doesn't do any favors.
The other class I was looking at was druids, which do seem to be getting, again, some of the changes do seem to be quite nice, especially for going down Circle of the Moon with the with shapeshifting, and that definitely seems to be getting a nice boost, which I always felt was for a class who the big thing is they can shapeshift.
USP, isn't it? Yeah.
It seemed extremely restrictive, but they seem to be adding more options, especially at higher levels, like where you can trade in spell slots for the ability to use a bonus action to shapeshift. What's it called again?
Wild shape.
Take your wild shape.
Wild shape, yep, that's one. So it's again, it looks like that they are adding improvements to help with that as well.
Yeah, the druid looks pretty good. I think Circle of the Moon's interesting. I think so. Druid has been my main class for 2 of the main campaigns that we've played. I really like druids. I think it is an improvement. I do think some of the quality. So this is where like the update can be really good, right? Some base quality of life upgrades can be really good, like the ability to speak in wild shape.
Yeah.
It sounds little, but it's such a big thing because the ability to speak in wild shape, suddenly you don't have to play. It's not Lotus Den Halfling. It's one of the other halflings that has telekinesis base. You're not instantly looking at, okay, I'll take the telekinetic feat so I can speak, or you're not having to speak to your DM like, I as a bear am like getting up and dancing, or can I draw in the ground, or what?
There's definitely times. There's definitely been times when I've been playing a druid and I played a wolf and I was like, don't go in there. And the GM was like, oh, you can't say anything because you're a wild shape. I was like, well, I put my teeth gently on his shoulder and pull back. And unless the people are like, it's the players you're playing with are like, okay, fair enough. As a player, I know what you're trying to do. As a character, I don't. But you can give them the benefit of the doubt and go, yeah, as a player, I probably know you don't want me to go in here by doing this. But it was like making me jump through these hoops to do something as simple as don't go in that room with me actively biting him gently and pulling him back. And you don't want to change, you don't want to wild shape and then wild shape again because that's a waste of wild shape.
Yeah,
Yes, totally, and that's where, particularly for classes which can get nerfed, like need their wild shape for combat, and suddenly it's like, oh, we made you wild shape because you can do this thing. And one of the things with druids, they've got such versatility, like, can you wild shape to do this, solve this problem for us? But then, yeah, having to unwild shape and be like, oh, I went and checked them, the coast seems to be clear, but you've come back to tell them the coast seems to be clear because your DM's like, you as a beetle can't communicate the coast is clear, right?
I think that's one of the greatest things of being a...
You have to untransform. But, like, yeah, suddenly you walk in, turns out that there were a bunch of kobolds hiding and you didn't have a high enough passive perception score. But you've done a couple of those searches and had to come back and untransform, and then suddenly as a Circle of the Moon druid, you're like, okay, well, what do I do? I'm all over out wild shape and don't have wild shapes anymore.
Ice knife.
Yeah. I mean, you just... Yeah, you're still a full spellcaster. It's hard to feel that bad as a druid, but like that sort of quality of life improvement is something that you bring with one D&D.
It's like your rogue not getting a sneak attack. It's what you do. But what's the point in doing it if you can't do it anymore? You feel like if you didn't expend your resource in a useful way, you're like, that was a wasted resource.
Yeah. And I've always wondered why, if you can shapeshift, why you lose your ability to speak when you're not becoming the animal, you are just taking on the form of. So there'd be stuff like speech that I can't. I've never understood why they would take that away. You know, you may not be able to speak fluently because you don't have a normal mouth kind of thing. If you're there, you may be a bit mumbled, but your ability to speak, I've never understood why they would take that away. So
I mean, lack of vocal cords is a pretty clear justification.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
You know, like I think this is where like having played the system, they can apply some understanding. But what's so difficult is they've shown some real understanding of some of the subtleties of the druid, I think, to improve it. And I actually think things like carrying over your AC. That's so huge. They're still going to really struggle for damage. I still think moon druids, which don't scale very well, have always had the problem that once you hit level 5, they're super OP before level 5. After level 5, they tend to really struggle. I still think they're going to struggle, but doing things like having the moon be an option, carrying your AC, a few of those other things, I think does improve, at least give some improvements, and they've shown some knowledge there. The wild inconsistency with which they've applied the knowledge, that sort of knowledge and learnings is, I mean, shown, I think, so much by the monk.
Yeah, the monk's one I haven't looked at yet. I looked at.
Don't. It's worse.
Yeah.
Rogue is really good. Rogue, the entire idea of using a sneak attack as a resource, it's apparently an artifact for old editions. I'm not super au fait with old editions, so. But that entire idea, I think, works really well. You've got decisions, and decisions are powerful, rather than a rogue just being like, oh, I'm just going to attack, because that's all most rogues do. Really, really good way of making rogue interesting, some really powerful abilities, but also just you always have a choice. And the other thing they do, which I really like, and someone said, and I think hit the nail on the head, if you decide to do your full sneak attack damage, you feel better about it now because you've chosen to do all that damage. It's not, this is just what I do. It's no, I've chosen to do that extra 2d6, and that 5 and that 4, that may well have been those extra 2d6, and that feels pretty good. So I really like what they've done with the rogue.
A lot of it does seem to be quality of life over drastic changes. I know they're saying fighters in general are getting the biggest change of them all. With a lot of the other ones, they're just, I think, standardizing everything. You're now getting spell trees that are limited to what's what they call them, like certain.
That's gone.
Well, they got. All right.
They ditched that in the last playtest, so they were doing the it's like arcane.
Yeah.
Nature,
primal,
holy, or whatever it was.
Yeah,
arcane, primal, and ninja, whatever the last one was. But they ditched that because I think they realized there was too much. They were having all these problems with spells that should be class specific, and then just access to spell lists. There's certain things that certain classes kind of favor crossover of 2 different types of spellcasting, then they're like, well, do we give them the whole? Then they end up giving them the whole list because they're like, well, if we're doing it by the list, we have to give them the whole list, and it's like suddenly like, why is the bard casting this spell? Does it make sense? Maybe not.
Unless you're multi-classing, which is a different thing altogether.
The thing I think Pointy Hat, the YouTube channel, said, the class fantasy, does the class fulfill the fantasy we're going for? Bard, he plays a song and everyone gets inspired. That works. A fighter fights things. A monk, what do you think of when you think of a monk? Drunken bastards like Jackie Chan, will run up walls and do flips and stuff. That's the class fantasy. When I think of monk, I think Spin Kingdom, Jet Li, those sort of like people flipping around and jumping off walls and stuff. That's my class fantasy. That's what I want to do. And do those abilities match up with that class fantasy? Druid, you're like, I'm one with nature, so I become one with nature, so I can become nature, I can become the animals. That's why, to me, the way I look at it.
Yeah. So the issue with the monk isn't that they haven't got a lot of things which make you feel like a monk, right? Like you're quick, you're armored, you're punching things, you can run up walls, you can run over water, you can catch missiles, all that stuff. It's the actual mechanical understanding of tying everything to the one resource in terms of chi or whatever they're calling it now, because they've rebranded it. I think they've rebranded it discipline points, which fine, but like they're still tying everything to one resource, and that just on a fundamentally really weak class, and then tying almost all subclass abilities to that same thing. So it's not that they don't have an idea, but when you've got Rogue, which one of the things I like about Rogue is they can do all their stuff, almost all their stuff without spending a resource, and they can do some really cool things. Then monks have very similar abilities to the Rogue, but have to spend a resource every time they do it. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's just objectively not as good.
I think.
No.
So the OGL and the horrific horrific content of 1.1, which they now claim they're not doing. Do you think after that we've heard of it, or do you think they're going to somehow find a way to slowly integrate it over time to get what they want without people noticing?
It's on the Creative Commons. I don't think there's much they can do. They're not going to do anything that's tied up in Creative Commons. They don't own that anymore. So that side of things, I think, is pretty done and dusted. They don't have. It's essentially under the guardianship of someone else. I think the entire fallout from it, I think, is interesting. Definitely seen more people, even channels which didn't typically do homebrew previously. It's doing some homebrew. I think they made a terrible call. I think they made a huge misjudgment and they managed it very, very poorly. But, if I'm being honest, do I think most players actually care? I think probably not. I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on the community. Things like Project Black Flag I've had a look at just seem to be 5e rules slightly tweaked. I really would be surprised if lots of people are going to play some of the alternative systems if they're not very, very different. So, Indestructible is one of the YouTubers he's making. I think it's called Vanguard, but he's just like, I'm just going to look at trying to design a completely different system. Like, that to me is far more interesting than playing another 5e-like system.
Yeah.
Albeit Baldur's Gate 3 does show that like a very similar system with some slight system adjustments can actually be really interesting. So I guess that's the counterpoint now, is like actually having played a 5e-like game that changes some things subtly through BG3, I might actually now be more tempted than I was previously.
Yeah. For the last week, the only things I've been reading are changes to D&D and what's been going on and how they made BG3, because that's an epic game.
That is great.
It's I'm like 24 hours in and I'm still struggling to get the fighting figured out. But
just there's one solution: just shove people off cliffs. Just always shove them off cliffs, and then you'll be fine. And then when there isn't a cliff, you just panic. And that's my approach to combat.
Yeah, I found out the cliff thing the hard way when someone did it to me and got one of my characters knocked off. Then I had to spend 5 minutes walking down to the bottom of him to res him to get at the end of the fight. That was a.
But that's interestingly going back to previous conversation. That's where Baldur's Gate's really interesting because they made verticality so important, shoving so important, and jumping so important. That strength is a really, really, really useful stat in Baldur's Gate 3 by making all they had to do is make shove a bonus action and create terrains with verticality, and then suddenly that entire be able to be strong and be able to jump high and all those sort of things. Yeah, people can fly, but you don't want to spend spell slots on that all the time and things like that. And just in combat as well, gives you that. They've done a really good job, I think, with making strength characters more interesting.
That was one of the things I was going to be talking about closer to the end, but time limits and all that. So I'll be saving that one for another day for a more in-depth talk on that one.
In regards to what you said, Quinn, I don't think it's not. I think they're going to the pivoting quite hard because they've realised they put the foot in it. Like a company's always going to act in their best interest for their business. But you're right, Matt. They basically haven't got a choice anymore. They've realised they've messed up big. I don't think they're going to recover from it. I think people are going to be really wary now. Those who care about it are just going to be like, right, this is our livelihood, we're not taking this into account. So it's just going to diversify. You're right, having lots of different 5e versions. There's Iskangar, 5e, which is the Player's Handbook, which is basically the Player's Handbook, except a PDF, and it's £3. It's a 5 normally, but it's been £3 for quite some time now. And it's basically all the same stuff. It's like Tiefling is called something else, but it's the same information. If you can't afford a £25 hardback book, of course you're going to go and buy the £3 book PDF and then play with me instead of down at the pub. I think
you don't even need to buy PDFs now. You just go online. Exactly, they can't even protect it just being on
So all I'd say is no, they're not. I don't think they can ever, like you said, they can't get back now. They can't. The things out of the bottle, they're not getting it back. However, I think they'll try and if their VTT is better than other VTTs, great. But if it's one more VTT and it gives people options, great. The video editing world is Premiere or Final Cut or maybe DaVinci Resolve. That's 3. That's not a lot of options. If you have 20 options to play 5e, great, because it means one person can't hold a monopoly. If you've got 7 or 8 versions of D&D Beyond, great, so that nobody can hold a monopoly. So I'm playing with mates and I'm like, oh great, I've got these PDFs, I want to play online with you, but you haven't got the stuff for D&D Beyond. And amazingly, one of the players is like, no, I bought the Player's Handbook, just all of my campaigns, and now all my players have got access to the core books, and I can't share them because I haven't got the PDF. So I can't send it to them, and I don't feel comfortable going to an illegal site and getting it that way. I'd rather, sure, I've got a legal book, I want to share it with you online, just for you. That's what D&D Beyond's for, but I don't want to buy the book again.
Yeah.
But I agree with Matt, they're not going to try again, but at the same time, they've lost my trust and I'm not giving it. I agree. Every way I can support someone else who's not Wizards of the Coast, that's what I'll do.
I do suspect version 6 probably will have a new OGL attached to it, but it's going to be from that point onwards. They're not going to try the backtracking thing, so which they tried, and that's the worst part of it, I think. And also saying, I'm a lot more wary of them than I ever have been.
They're owned by Hasbro. They're a big company. To be honest, I think when people are like, we're so shocked, I'm like, what, you think
Hasbro? Yeah.
you think Amazon are the good guys? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, let's be honest. They're big companies. They're out to make money. Like, people were like, I'm so shocked. You've done it. No, for me, I was just like, I don't feel worse or better because I think it was mainly a Hasbro move anyway. But that's a lot of it's like, well, yeah, the company did something wrong. They tried to do something to redeem it, but they're a money-making company. Yeah, they made a bad call. It's annoying. But I think people who trusted them as this, like, trust them a lot, I was kind of like, well, it's still a money-making game. Some of the rules they put out are really good, and some of the rules, like, they put out some really shit books. Like, that's just the nature of the company. Like, I don't know. It was never like that big a deal for me.
I think on that note, I'd like to say thank you for being part of this. Hopefully you'll want to partake in future ones when we have a bit more time and a bit more planning to get something done. And
Sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you as well, Keljorn.
You're welcome.
And
Sorry for the interruption.
So, yep. So until next time.
Take care.
Thank you all, and thank you very much again.